certain speech and even some religious beliefs. The framers, in their wisdom, also knew there would likely be attempts to silence certain opinions or infringe upon certain rights by those holding political office and other positions of power. Thankfully, the Bill of Rights and the Constitution protects us against this tyranny of the majority, if you will, where a legislative body could vote away these rights with a simple majority were it not for the protections of the Constitution. So the question is, does the second exercise of the Second Amendment, right of self-defense, require any less defense against infringement than the exercise of free speech or free religion? And the answer is no. Can a legislative body infringe upon or remove the constitutionally protected right to bear arms in order to simply make others feel comfortable? Again, the answer is no. And that's exactly what this bill attempts to do. The second point I'd like to make is this bill is unconstitutionally vague. It requires a person that openly carries a firearm to determine, to determine whether another person, unlikely even known to them, is feeling threatened, AKA uncomfortable, thus putting the person with the firearm in the untenable position of trying to decipher another's feelings in order to determine if the open carry of a firearm at any particular moment is legal or if they're committing a felony, which it would be under this bill. And finally, this bill ignores the fact that it is already illegal in Washington to threaten anyone with a firearm. We've heard testimony earlier about AK-47s in people's faces. That's already clearly illegal. Nobody has issue with that. But this bill would make it a felony to merely possess a firearm openly without brandishing it or in any way using it to threaten another person. So for these reasons, we urge you and the committee to vote no on House Bill 1283. And thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kuziak. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. So much appreciated. Questions for Mr. Kuziak? Okay, thank you. Good to see you. Let's hear from Mr. Don Mitchell, please, sir.
Thank you, Chairperson Hanson and committee members. I'm Daniel Mitchell from the 49th District, Vancouver, Washington. And just to be clear, the second degree assault if you point a firearm at somebody in the state of Washington. My green screen changed on me, oops. It's also illegal to intimidate somebody. Those are already laws on the books. On October 29th, 2020, Clark County deputies shot and killed a young black man 3 blocks from my business, a man that was being arrested for illicit drug sales. He drew a weapon on drew a weapon on the officers and was tragically shot and killed. But that was born from an illegal act. Vancouver soon erupted with the wrath of Portland seasoned protesters as they exported their brand of violence to my hometown. They brought their vitriol and hate to my doorstep. The next day, we received warning calls from the Sheriff's Department, the ATF, and the U.S. Marshal Service. As we operate the largest firearms store in Southwest Washington, we were targeted. That night, thousands descended upon my neighborhood, and the police were completely absent. Hours passed and the protesters marched, assaulting people, setting fires, smashing windows, and trapping bystanders in their violent conflagration. 8 of us stood guard outside of our business with 0 police presence. 2,000 firearms stowed behind steel cages and concrete walls. Violence everywhere. This went on for weeks. Each night we prepared for the worst. When violent protest arrived at my doorstep, this law would criminalize us for defending our property, and honestly for defending the lives of many others if my location was to be breached. We watched as other businesses were attacked with 0 police protection. The endless cycle of these mostly peaceful protests and the violence stemming from them must be stopped. We all agree it must be stopped. We must enforce and prosecute all of those breaking the law. The cities have created a culture that now accepts violence, protest, and allows it to grow. Those poor leadership decisions do not undermine our civil rights, like expressing ourselves at a rally. And yes, freedom often results in some discomfort. This bill has serious legal flaws. It chooses the type of expression and assembly allowed. It is constitutionally vague and at best subjective. More seriously, it begs the question, if we're doing such a marvelous policy job, why are there so many reasonable people stacked up outside? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Representative Graham has a question, please.
Thank you, Chair Hanson. Mr. Mitchell, I am going to, given what you were talking about with your testimony and the very real fear and concern that you had with the story that you've just shared, you know, there was somebody that wasn't familiar with the Second Amendment. And so just really quickly, I'd like to just go over that real quick.
Time out, Representative Graham, I'm sorry. If you have a question, by all means, let's have a quick question so the respondent can answer quickly. Is that
Okay.
all right? Okay.
That's fine. So suffice it to say that you are in support of the Second Amendment that protects your rights in these situations where clearly there are individuals that meant to do you or somebody else harm, that you support our Second Amendment.
Question.
Actually, I support all of the amendments. I support all of the Constitution, and I don't put my finger on any one particular amendment and say it's more valuable than another. They all stand equally in my beliefs.
Thank you. Representative Goodman has a question, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Tom Kwesiak, if he's still here. It looks like he still is. Tom, I'm looking at what's called the unlawful carry statute, RCW 9.41.270 sub 1, which says it shall be unlawful for a person to carry a firearm. And here's the key phrase, that either manifests an intent to intimidate another or that warrants alarm for the safety of other persons. Can you tell me what the dividing line is? What does that mean?
I think there's in this bill, there's no intent to intimidate. It relies on somebody's feelings of being threatened. And so I think that's the biggest thing. How are you to determine that? If you're a person or a group of people carrying, and again, not necessarily even in a protest. I mean, somebody could be in Walla Walla going wine tasting and 3 people across the street from them are open carrying because maybe that's what they do a little bit more in Eastern Washington. And they call the police on you. And I don't know what your defense is supposed to be because I can't determine whether you feel threatened or not.
Thank you.
I didn't take any action to okay, sorry.
No, I didn't know you. I'm sorry. I didn't
That's
mean to
okay.
interrupt.
I think you get the point.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I thought you were done. Okay. Further questions for either Mr. Mitchell or Mr. Kwesiak? Okay. Seeing none, let's hear from Duncan Clark. Please unmute yourself and proceed.
Good morning to the committee chair and members of the committee. My name is Duncan Clark. I'm an individual representing myself. I live in Seattle, Washington. I am strongly opposed to this bill, primarily for the reasons others have mentioned. And really the main point here is that everything, especially hearing from the primary sponsor, everything criminalized, everything that this bill is supposed to solve is already criminalized. It is already illegal to brandish a firearm. It is already illegal. It is already illegal even to carry a firearm in a way that is intimidating. That is already a crime in the state of Washington. And every single case I have heard described this morning is already criminalized. So to me, there are really only 2 explanations for why this is being pushed, which is either a misunderstanding of the law that exists, which is entirely understandable, or the goal is to essentially just to criminalize people who are protesting and open carrying. Now, I've never open carried in my life. I don't really think it's effective, but I do support the right of people to do so as a method of protest without being charged as felons and potentially receiving multi-year sentences for behaving in a way that is already outside of Washington's extremely stringent laws on brandishing, and literally having laws already on the books that criminalize just carrying a weapon in a way that is intended to intimidate someone. That is already illegal. So the only instances this law is going to cover are instances where people are carrying in a group in a way that is not intended to intimidate someone, in a way that is not brandishing, which is clearly catered to charging people who protest at the Capitol in the way that they choose to, which I think is their right, is charging them with felonies and giving them multi-year prison sentences because certain elements of the legislature don't like the way that they behave, which in my mind is extremely undemocratic. I lived on Capitol Hill in Seattle this summer, near the CHOP protest zone, where 3 separate shootings happened and 2 people were killed. And those people had violated every single firearms statute in the state. They violated I-594, they violated I-1639, and they did brandish and intimidate people with weapons in a way that was unlawful. And then they killed people with weapons. And in none of those shootings was even a single arrest made. So I fail to see how adding another law that's going to criminalize us and make us felons just for open carrying in a group is going to solve any problems when the state has demonstrated it is entirely incapable of even enforcing the laws that we already have. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Clark? Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you for your testimony. Let's hear from the next set of testifiers. Vice Chair Simmons, please.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time here. It's a lot of people signed up. The next